on October 12, 1492, after more than 2 months at sea, 3 ships, the Nina, the Pinta, and the Santa, sailed under the Spanish flag. At their helm was an ambitious navigator, Christopher Columbus. Now we know where he thought he was going and where he actually ended up. But what if I told you that 4 days the crew didn't know exactly where they were? Let me explain. Hi everyone, welcome to this channel. Today we're going to talk about the day that Christopher Columbus reached the Americas. Before we get started, remember to click that subscribe button. Also, feel free to check out my podcast in the description below. New episodes premiere every Wednesday. Okay, let's get into it. Let's get one thing straight from the start. Christopher Columbus never actually reached the continent of North America. That distinction belongs to the famous or infamous Italian explorer John Cabot, who landed in Newfoundland, Canada around 1497. However, the vast majority of people consider Columbus's landing in the Bahamas for years prior to be the discovery of the Americas by Europeans. This is largely because of the impact his voyages had on world history and the beginning of the age of exploration. There's also the small detail that all of the explorers that followed, including Cabot, followed in Columbus's wake due to the inaccurate maps and navigational tools of the time. When Columbus set sail, he honestly believed he was sailing west to India. What's more, when he finally realized he had made landfall somewhere other than Asia, he still believed he was in India. So who are we kidding? If there's anyone to blame for the inaccuracy of European maps, it's the guy who refused to accept reality. Now, back to Columbus and his crew. They left Spain on August 3, 1492. The fleet consisted of the aforementioned 3 ships and approximately 90 men. Their destination was supposed to be the East Indies, which included modern-day Indonesia, Philippines, Thailand, Vietnam, and India. It was here that the crew hoped to find gold and spices in abundance. Unfortunately, after more than 2 months at sea, their provisions were running dangerously low and tempers were starting to flare. For over 2 weeks, the ships had been sailing without any wind, making almost no progress across the ocean. Crew members began to believe they were trapped forever in the endless blue expanse. Then, just when things were looking their bleakest, the lookout shouted, "Land!" All aboard cheered and began waving to the lookout as he frantically waved back. When the crew first saw the island, they were ecstatic. They landed on an island and explored it, finding only thick forest and no people. They chopped down trees to build a cross and a small chapel and then celebrated with a feast. After which they took turns swimming off the ships to rest their tired bodies. On October 15th, Columbus wrote in his journal, "The land must needs be some one of the Antilles of the Blessed Trinity. For since we had come into these seas, the course of the currents and winds had been such that if we had been sailing in any other part of the world, we could not have come so far to the west without having met some land or some people." Moreover, our hopes had by now so far overcome our fears that we could not believe that the whole earth was nothing else but water. Now, you might be saying, but wait a minute, so did he know it was an island? Well, yes and no. You see, when Columbus first spotted the island, he assumed it was part of an archipelago, possibly the Madeira Islands, which belonged to Portugal, their biggest rival. He did not want to make the Portuguese king and queen happy, so he kept secret the fact that he had discovered new lands. Columbus and his crew stayed on the island for 7 days in total. During this time, they explored further inland, searching for precious metals. Of course, they found none. In his journal, Columbus wrote that the island was barren of everything except for some fig trees, which were good. There was no river, nor could we find any inhabitants. We saw no people, although we went through the whole island on every side. It seemed to us that it was an island without inhabitants, and the more that we marveled thereat, the more we feared being alone in such a place without help. Now, you may be wondering why they didn't stay longer. Well, there were 2 reasons. First, they needed to keep moving to avoid the lack of food and fresh water. Second, they were superstitious. Friday was considered an unlucky day and they didn't want to test fate. By staying on the island any longer, they dropped anchor and set sail for what they hoped was India. However, during the night, a storm destroyed the ship Santa Maria, forcing the crew of the remaining 2 vessels to flee to land. Luckily, they were able to use wreckage from the Santa Maria to build a makeshift dock, allowing them to unload cargo and pitch camp on the island. Over the next few weeks, they built huts and tried to settle down. But unfortunately, their luck ran out. One night, a violent windstorm hit the island, destroying their homes and causing chaos. With no shelter and very little food, the crew was forced to flee the island once again. Luckily, the crew was eventually picked up by a Spanish ship and returned to Europe. Although Columbus had failed to reach the East Indies, he had discovered the Americas. Or had he? See, he still believed he was in India. In fact, when he arrived back in Spain, he insisted to the royal court that he had indeed reached the eastern coast of India. Even when presented with evidence that disproved his theory, he continued to insist that he was right until his dying day. In a letter to the Spanish monarchs, Ferdinand and Isabella, Columbus wrote, seeing that the shore was quite low and flat, did not think that I had come upon the mainland, much less did I dream that we had arrived at any island. On the contrary, I held the opinion that we were off the northwest coast of India, not far from the port of Cathay, which is the one nearest to the eastern limit of the world, where the sun rises and where the night is not. As we now know, Columbus had actually reached the Bahamas. The Lucayan archipelago is part of the Greater Antilles and consists of 7 islands, namely Great Inagua, Mayaguana Samana, Cay, San Juan, Cay Sal, Crooked Island, and Long Island. The exact island Columbus first reached is unknown. However, historians believe it was most likely Watling's Island, which has also been known by the names of Cay Sal and San Salvador. Today, the islands are home to approximately 70,000 people. Nassau is the capital and largest city. Many of the islands are famous tourist destinations, home to some of the best resorts and beaches in the Caribbean. So, if you're ever in the area, be sure to raise a glass to old mate Chris Columbus. Just don't forget your sunscreen. Now, thanks for watching. If you enjoyed this video, be sure to like and share it. Also, remember to check out my podcast in the description below. New episodes premiere every Wednesday. Until next time, goodbye.